Okay, so this is DraftKings picks and betting lines for UFC Sacramento, which will take place on Saturday. Paige Van Zandt versus Michelle Waterson. I know it's been a while since I did my first one. I just didn't have time to go through a whole fight tape study and didn't want to half-ass it. So I figured I'd just wait until I had time to review the card properly, and that was this time. So here we go. Okay, first fight. Bojan Velocevic versus Sultan ALIEV. You can have ALIEV at plus 135, while Velocevic is a minus 160 favorite. This fight is weird to me because at first I thought Velocevic could edge out a decision, and I still think that. But I also think that for DraftKings, a guy like ALIEV is the better play, just because I think he has way more fight-stopping potential. He's got power in his hands. He's a really good sambo wrestler. I believe was a sambo wrestling champion. And Velocevic, I don't know, hasn't looked impressive at all in his two UFC fights. He has a draw and a win. Both were razor close, and both could have went against him. So he just doesn't really offer that much in terms of upside. He just doesn't. He's like a decent striker, decent little wrestler, grappler, but I feel like if he wins, again, he's just going to edge out a close decision. While ALIEV has the power in his hands. People are kind of down on ALIEV because he got knocked out in his last fight, like a one-punch scorching, but I don't know. I always tend to give guys, the first time I see something like that happen, I always tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just got caught weird, maybe they just got caught right, and they got put out. I don't really put too much stock in it, so if that's a reason for people to be off of ALIEV, then so much the better, and we can pick him. He'll probably be under-owned on DraftKings, and for plus 135, I kind of like it. I feel like the Velocevic minus 160 is way too wide for a guy who really hasn't shown us anything in the UFC as far as tools, while ALIEV, even though he lost, I feel like he's a bit better put together. Alright, so our next fight then is Freddie Serrano versus Hector Sandoval. Serrano at plus 107, Hector Sandoval at minus 127. And I get my odds from BetDSI, in case anyone was wondering. As far as DraftKings goes, you can have Hector Sandoval for 8,100, and Freddie Serrano is at the same price. So, I'm kind of seeing a lot of people saying that Serrano, that basically they wouldn't pick Serrano to win a fight against anybody who they think can fight, just because he's older. He's in his late 30s, I believe. He's got 4 professional fights. They're all in the UFC though, but still only 4 professional fights. But the reason why I really kind of like him here, and I really feel like he's being overlooked, is because he's a really good grappler, really good wrestler. I saw a lot of people saying that he kind of got worked in that Benoit fight, and I watched it again, and I really disagree. I feel like Serrano took him down pretty much at will, and powerful takedowns, power doubles, and things like that. Didn't have a ton of offense when he got Benoit to the ground, but he wasn't inactive. He tried to do his offense. So I do like that. And as far as Sandoval goes, I mean, if you haven't seen him fight, regional fighter, he's a guy who likes to wing shots, really looping punches. In his UFC debut, he got worked by another grappler and submitted fairly quickly because he just loops punches and tries to fire at you. And any decent grappler is just going to time that and get the takedown. And Weiss did, and that was that. And now the only thing about this is we haven't really seen Serrano, or we haven't seen him at all, with any kind of submission game. So that could be like, well, I don't want just to count on lame prey, but Serrano also has power in his hands as well. So I feel like this fight could end couple of ways. I feel like Serrano could either get into that big looping firefight and catch him, or he could just sort of out wrestle him and maybe get a sub. If we're lucky. But all in all, I think Serrano is the better pick here, and that's who I would go with in that spot. So now we move on to Eddie Wineland versus Takeya Mizugaki. Let's go DraftKings first since I have it open. Wineland will set you back $8,800, while Mizugaki is $7,400, and the betting lines are plus 185 comeback on Mizugaki and a minus 220 favorite for Wineland. I always get nervous about fighters like Wineland, like guys who are these vets who are you thought they were on their way out. It reminds me of Tim Boetsch, sort of, although Boetsch has put together a decent stretch here now, winning his last 2 or 3, I forget. I think it's 2. But so Wineland's one of those guys who you kind of thought was on his way out. Then he pulls it together and knocks out Frankie Saenz in his last fight. And so, okay, all well and good. But, I see a lot of shine on him now. A lot of people going for him. And I don't know. I just don't trust it. I just think, he stands so upright. His hands are always down. Leave himself open to be hit. And Mizugaki, he's been around a while and he gets hit himself. But he also can throw his hands. He can put his combinations together. So I really feel like this is a good dog spot for Mizugaki to get a nice decision here. I do think Wineland probably has the better shot at finishing the fight. But with this kind of disparity in the line, I feel like Mizugaki is probably the better play. And I certainly wouldn't trust Wineland at that price. And as far as the DraftKings goes, Mizugaki 7,400 is one of the cheaper prices on the card. So if you want to go there and for some salary relief to a guy who could, get some significant strikes, maybe 60 to 80 points for a win, maybe, which would be fine at 7,400. I really don't think that's a bad play at all, and that's where I would go. In terms of DraftKings, you might not want to you might not want to shut out, that is, Eddie Wineland exposure entirely, because he does have the opportunity to get the knockout. But at 8,800, I mean, there's just better opportunities in my opinion. I feel like this card is like that a lot with its top end. Like there's a couple guys that I like at the top end, but for the most part, I feel like we're just kind of overpriced. Like I like a lot more fighters in the mid to high 7,000s at this card than I do with the higher 8,000 levels. Anyway, so let's move on. Next fight is Irene Aldana versus Leslie Smith, and Smith can be had for plus 250. Comeback on Aldana is minus 305. As far as DraftKings goes, Aldana could be had for 9,100, whereas Smith 7,100. So this is kind of just what I was referring to. Aldana, if you haven't seen her fight, she's a TKO artist. She puts her opponents down, and that's good for our purposes of DraftKings. But if you saw her last fight at Invicta, she tends to get hit a lot too. She leaves herself very open. Now that might not matter with a person like Leslie Smith because she doesn't hit hard at all, but she does strike with volume. So if she can put it together and maybe take a decision, I wouldn't put that past her. She's also got a solid ground game. And Aldana doesn't really have one, so getting the fight to the ground could make the difference. I just don't, I wouldn't mind getting a couple plays on Aldana. In fact, I think I will have a couple plays on Aldana in DraftKings just because the knockout potential is there. So if you're putting together a couple lineups, you can't, it's another one like Eddie Wineland, you can't fade it entirely just because the knockout potential is there. But I think Smith, I don't see her with too many avenues other than a decision. but you know, I think it's a winnable fight. I don't think it's an unwinnable fight for her. So I mean, as far as that line goes, over 300 is just far too much for someone making their debut. So I would stay away from it there. Maybe if you can get a KO prop, you might want to do that, because if she wins, it's probably how it's going to happen. But otherwise, yeah, I might just steer clear. And for DraftKings, I don't think I would take Smith for DraftKings. I just don't know how much upside she can offer you. I mean, you don't really want to be looking at like a 40, 50 point win. I mean, that's just not something that's going to win you any money, really. But yeah, so Aldana for the knockout potential. Otherwise, maybe just stay away. And the next fight is Josh Emmett versus Scott Holtzman. On DraftKings, Emmett could be had for 8,700, Holtzman 7,500, and our betting lines there are minus 170 for Emmett, plus 145 for Holtzman. I feel like this is really a bit much for Emmett. I mean, he did a good job in his UFC debut against John Tuck, but I mean, John Tuck was just, you know, super stationary, never really came after him until the third round, when Emmett rather, had a compound fracture in his finger, and was basically just, you know, running away until the fight ended. I mean, you can't really blame him at that point. But he sat on the 2 rounds he won previous, one decision. Emmett's got good movement. He likes to get in and out and throw combinations. He's a decent wrestler, although he doesn't go to it that much. But yeah, I'm just not sure about, because he does get hit as well. He leaves himself open to be hit, and he seems to have trouble going backward. Like if he gets pressured, he seems to leave himself open to be hit, and he seems to have a real aversion to taking punishment. Like he'll get hit, and then he'll just book out of the way. And that didn't just happen in the third round of the Tuck fight when he hurt himself. It was also happened in his last regional fight previous to that. So I don't know, Emmett. Again, for 8,700, or what, the minus 170, that's just too wide for me. These are weird lines and prices for me. Some of the weirder I've seen in a while, just because I don't really think they measure up, which is good, because I guess because there's value to be had. But as far as Scott Holtzman goes, I mean, he's got a good wrestling game. He's a decent striker. He's not a great one, but I see a lot of people saying stuff like, the big criticism seems to be, well, he got out grappled by Drew Dober, so how much can you really trust him? Drew Dober's not a terrible wrestler. He came in as a Muay Thai guy, and so everybody just says, oh, you got out grappled by the Muay Thai guy, but he's a wrestler in his own right. I mean, it didn't work against OAM in his last fight, but I mean, that's a little bit different. I think Holtzman could be somebody to get some takedowns and ride out a win here, get some decent points with the DraftKings scoring system heavily favoring grapplers and takedowns, advancements, and things like that. But otherwise, this is a fight I think I'd stay away from. I don't see Emmett knocking Holtzman out. And if he's not going to do that, 8,700, which is what he is on DraftKings, is just not going to... It's just too much, and the minus 170 is too wide, in my opinion. So this is another one where if I was going to do anything, I might go Holtzman. But otherwise... Or maybe an inside the distance prop, because I don't see this finishing either. I mean, not inside... I mean decision prop, not inside this. But you know what I meant. But yeah, so that's another one where it's either, you know, the dog or the fade, because I don't know, I just feel like a lot of these favorites are too heavily favored for their matchup or their position or their whatever. So all right, let's go on to our next fight. We have James Moontasrì versus Alex Morono, and Morano is 8,400 on DraftKings, while MOONTASRI is 7,800. As far as betting lines, they both minus 110, so we got to pick them. And this fight to me, it looks to me pretty clearly like a MOONTASRI just overwhelming Morano and beating him. The way guys have tried to beat James MOONTASRI, and it worked for Oliveira, and Zafir tried it before he got hit. He got caught with a spinning back fist. But the way guys try to beat him is they try to make it ugly. They try to push him up against the cage and grapple him and strike. And because he's a karate taekwondo guy, black belt, so he needs space to get off his offense. And what guys try to do is they try to smother him, and they try to make it so that he can't have the distance to strike. I don't really see Morano doing that. Morano seems like the kind of guy who wants to stand and strike. He really wings wild shots too. That's another big thing. I think MOONTASRI is just the more technical fighter, and I think that MOONTASRI, I mean, he could get a knockout here, but I think it's more likely that he wins by decision. But this is one where I would be kind of surprised if MOONTASRI doesn't take it. I just don't think Morano is polished enough from what I've seen. He got the win over Kyle Noak, which was questionable. He took some damage in that fight too. So, yeah, for me, MOONTASRI is pretty safe. I don't know if that's going to be like a popular opinion, but I actually think he's a pretty safe fight. But I do also think that if you're playing on DraftKings, he's probably going to be pretty highly owned, just because the price seems way out of whack for me. I don't know how Morano gets a higher price than him, but yeah, so 7,800. If you want to stick him in there as kind of an anchor, I feel like there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like this is a fight he should take. I just don't see Morano doing that much to fluster him. All right, so moving on, we got Colby Covington versus Brian Barberena. Covington, kind of an expensive play at 8,900, while Barberena will net you 73, cost you 7,300. And as far as the betting lines go, we have Barberena at plus 290, Colby Covington at minus 355. Brian Barberena seems to be the guy that everybody underrates and doesn't think he's going to win, and then wins. Obviously, Sage Northcutt, obviously Warlley Alves. But that Warlley Alves fight is an odd one for me, because Warlley Alves, I think, was clearly winning the first round and won the first round in that fight. I mean, he gassed pretty badly, and then Barberena is just a tough guy who hangs around, and then was just able to outstrike him and take the decision. But it's funny, because if you watch that fight, you see a lot of times where Alves had him against the cage, or Alves was able to duck under a shot and get him in a clinch. But Alves isn't really a wrestler. So if Covington is able to do that, he should be able to get him down without really an issue. If he's going to give him that many opportunities, that many openings. And I think he will. I think Covington's going to have his opportunities to get him down. And it's funny when you watch that last Covington fight. I mean, it really, I'm not to compare their skill levels, but it really reminded me of the Nurmagomedov Michael Johnson fight, where he just took Max Griffin down, did the wrist right thing, and just really just pressured him the entire fight, and just kind of destroyed him. The TKO came in the third round. It wasn't even really the hard shots. It was just that he had beaten the fight out of Max Griffin, and he was just peppering him with shots, and Griffin wasn't fighting back, so the ref called it off. And I mean, look, 6 takedowns and 12 advancements in that fight. That's a ton of points. It's 124 fantasy points he got for that performance. So I mean, if he can come anywhere close to that, and I really don't think something like 5-6 takedowns is out of the ordinary or something that we shouldn't expect. Even if he loses the fight, which I don't really see happening, but it's fighting, so anything's possible. So he's got. I don't really. It's hard to really think of fighters in typical DFS terms with like ceilings and floors, because so much shit can happen that it's just difficult to predict. You know, a guy can get knocked out with a punch, and that'll be it. But I really think that Covington, even if he loses, has a decent floor for this fight, and the ceiling, as we could see, actually his last two fights over 100 points. So I really think he's another one that could be an anchor, albeit I mean kind of expensive, almost 9,000, you know. But I do think he's somebody you could anchor in your lineups. Wouldn't pay the minus 355 for him, obviously. Wouldn't even really try to get a decision prop, because he could get one of those. I mean, his last two fights are stoppages, so that might be a bet I would just fade altogether. But as far as DraftKings, I think you have to have some shares of Covington, and I really think you could fade Barberena altogether. I mean, that might be famous last words. He might come back and embarrass me now, but so be it. I just think that Covington really just has the tools to get this done, and I think he will. So, all right, on to the next fight, which is Cole Miller and Mizuto Hirota. They are both to be had at 8,100 on DraftKings, and close in the betting lines as well. Hirota minus 115, while Cole Miller is minus 105. Now, before I get into the technical stuff of this fight, it needs to be mentioned, no matter what you think the effect will be on the fight, it needs to be mentioned that Cole Miller gave that Sherdog interview during his training camp for this fight. Said he didn't want to be there, stemming from the Manila cancellation. He's saying that, he's just punching the clock. And then the MMA Hour, he said this is his last fight and he's not going to look to re-sign. So it's just strange to me. Like, I don't think that he's going to get in the ring and lay down and go, okay, well, I guess I'm beat. But Hirota can throw hard hands. We saw it in the Ishihara fight. He can tag, and he's tough. So let's say he gets hit with a hard shot. Is he gonna look for an excuse to get out of there when he gets it put on him a little bit by Hirota? Is he really gonna fight for it? And it's hard to tell. And Hirota, it's not like, I mean, yeah, he was getting outpaced by Ishihara in that fight a ton, but Ishihara is way quicker. He bounces around like a kangaroo, and Cole Miller's not going to do that. And Cole Miller's the longer fighter, but it's not like he fights like a long fighter who's just going to stick that jab in your face. He doesn't really do. He's way more tentative than that. So if Cole Miller can get this to the ground, he's always a sub threat, obviously, but I really think this is a nice opportunity. Not in the betting line, because it's too close for me. I would like Hirota at more dog money, but for DraftKings, 8,100 is fine for him. I wouldn't have it in too many lineups. I might have it as a change of pace in one or two, if you're doing a couple, because I don't really see Hirota finishing. He could. As I said, he could catch Miller, and Miller could just, be looking for a way out. But I don't know. I don't really want to bank on that. I think if Hirota wins, it's probably going to be by decision. And Cole Miller could get a sub, but I wouldn't bank on that either. I mean, this fight against Alex Caceres was the best Caceres has ever looked by far. And you could say, well, Hirota's not nearly as tricky as a guy like Caceres with the angles and whatnot, and that's true, but It's just something that I'm not prepared to really invest a ton in, to say maybe Miller goes to the ground, maybe gets that sub. I mean, and even when he had Caceres in the armbar, he couldn't finish it. So I'm not putting any faith in Cole Miller there. So Hirota or nothing for me for the most part. Yeah, I might have a change of heart and put like one DraftKings lineup with Cole Miller in it, but I don't know. We'll see how I feel tomorrow. But all right, next fight is Henrique De Silva versus Paul Craig. De Silva on DraftKings is $9,000. Paul Craig is $7,200. I like De Silva. My criticism of him would probably be kind of the same as the fighter coming up, Mike Perry, which is that his style seems to be, okay, you can hit me, but you're not going to hurt me, and I can hurt you, so I'm just going to walk forward, and then I'm going to hit you, and I'm going to put you out, which is basically what he does. His last fight against Christensen, he got a scramble armbar sub, which was nice, but he has a purple belt in jiu-jitsu too, but primarily he relies on striking. But he's pretty diverse. He's got really nice kicks. He's got obviously really nice power in his hands. He's got he's good in the clinch. But it is kind of concerning that we have to say though that he took a knee like right on the chin in that Christensen fight and never looked dazed, never looked out of it. Just he fell to the floor and was ready to get into guard if Christensen wanted to go there. So it seems like he's got a nice chin on him, and I feel like he's pretty safe at that price, even though he does get hit a lot. And Paul Craig, he's a Bama fighter, regional guy. He's a sub specialist. You know, he seems like the one thing that we should be paying attention to in this fight is how is De Silva going to react when a guy like Paul Craig, who does actively go for takedowns, at least when he feels like he can't outstrike his opponent, he goes for takedowns. So, like he runs the pipe on the single leg, he's double leg. So, how is De Silva going to react to a guy who's actively trying to take him down? I don't know. And can Paul Craig get him down? My guess would be it would be hard for him to keep De Silva down if he got him there. But I don't know that for sure. But overall, I do think De Silva is pretty safe here, even for the price. I think he keeps it standing for the most part, and I think he gets a pretty comfortable win here, knockout win or stoppage win. I didn't see that much from Paul Craig that blew me away. I feel like a lot of these Bama guys who come, I feel like whenever I watch a Bama fighter, and they're coming up to the UFC, so I watch some of their fights. It's always like it's like a 7-0 guy and against the 8-0 guy, and we're gonna see what happens. So like, I don't know, maybe somebody who knows more about Bama could school me on this, I guess. But I just feel like if your organization has that many undefeated fighters in it, I don't know, kind of makes me question the level of competition. But I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert on the inner workings of the Bama regional scene, so maybe somebody can school me on that. But in summation, long-winded summation, Henrique De Silva, I think, pretty safe at 9,000. And before I forget, let's get you those odds. Minus 207 for De Silva and plus 177 for Paul Craig. That honestly feels kind of okay to me. Like I might prefer Henrique at like minus 180, 190, but I think minus 207 is fine. I think he should win this fight. Not to say that Paul Craig doesn't have any avenues to victory, but it's sort of hard for me, especially considering, as I said earlier, that De Silva he's not like dead on the ground. It's not like you get him there and now he can't do anything. So, yeah, I think De Silva, and I think he's another one of those anchor plays. I think he's something you can fall back on and say, yeah, he should really win this fight. Okay, so fun one next. Alan Jouban versus Mike Perry. Um, Alan Jouban comeback plus 110. Mike Perry minus 130. I feel like these lines are either really close or blown apart, which makes for a hard betting day, or potentially could, but also kind of makes it more fun. So okay, Mike Perry. My history with Mike Perry is I picked him to beat Hunju Lim. I picked him to lose against Danny Roberts, and when I did that, I only got one comment on my last video, which was stop doubting Mike Perry, essentially. And Mike Perry comes out and wins. And I'm picking against him again, so I guess I'm still doubting Mike Perry, but there's a good reason for that. I think because I mentioned that him and De Silva kind of have the same style, which is true. Where it's just like, okay, you're not gonna hurt me, but I can hurt you, so I'm gonna walk forward until I can get in range to hurt you, which is fine against some lesser competition. But here's the thing: Mike Perry is not a diverse striker. Mike Perry basically just wants to throw his hands at you, and if he connects, you're gonna go to sleep. But if you can keep him at range, which Alan Jouban should be able to do with the vicious kicks that he has, I just don't know how successful that strategy is going to be. And I have to say that Perry showed better ground game than I thought in the Danny Roberts fight. So I was kind of impressed by that, but it's not enough for me to say I think Mike Perry is just going to go out and smash Alan Jouban here. I think Jouban has more tools. I think he's more technical, and he hits plenty hard. He hits hard enough. Maybe not as hard as Mike Perry, but he hits hard enough where he can put him down, I think. And I don't on DraftKings. This is another situation where I wouldn't. By the way, let me tell you what the prices are. Mike Perry 8,500. Sorry about that. Mike Perry 8,500, and Alan Jouban 7,700, which is a good price for Jouban, I believe. That's a very good price for him. But if I'm playing DraftKings, it's not like I fade. This is another one of those ones where I don't fade Perry completely, because he definitely could get the knockout, and you don't want to get burned for 100 points in that spot. I mean, because it could make or break a card, or really make or break you cashing in it in certain cases. But the way I would play it, and I always look at it in terms of multiple lineups. If you're playing multiple lineups, I would have more Jouban than I would have Perry, because I just feel like Jouban is the more complete fighter, and he's going to take it home. And Perry could embarrass me again. In which case I would have if Perry convincingly wins this fight, I might have to retake stock of my criticisms of him. But it depends on what he shows too. Like if he just lands a punch in the first 30 seconds, it's something we all knew would happen. But if he shows me a new wrinkle or two, then maybe I'll say he's developing. But I feel like his kind of style is just, it can win you a lot of fights against bad or decent fighters, but against the better or even just good solid fighters, I don't think you have an advantage in that spot if you're a guy who fights like Mike Perry. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if the fan favorite is ready to embarrass me again. But all right, the next fight is Uriah Faber versus Brad Pickett. Faber can be had for 9,600 on DraftKings. Brad Pickett with the lowest price by far on the card at 6,000. And for the betting lines, we have Brad Pickett at plus 310, Uriah Faber minus 380. This is such a weird fight because, long story short, none of these guys have shown you much of anything in a while. Brad Pickett has gone longer for showing you nothing, admittedly. Brad Pickett has lost, let's see, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4 out of his last 5, and it should be 5 in a row because he didn't beat Rivera in that fight. That fight was in England. He got a really charitable decision, and otherwise, and then he just went out and just got starched by Yuri Alcantara in his last fight. So you look at it and you want to say, okay, Faber, but the first thing about that is 9,600 for Uriah Faber at this point in his career, at the literal end of his career, is just, I mean, look, if he burns me, he burns me. I'm not having any Uriah Faber in my DraftKings lineup, just because he hasn't been active enough. He just, in his fights now, he just sits there and fakes and feints, but just doesn't do anything. And he just waits for the other guy to hit him and maybe tries to counter, but doesn't really put shots together. You want to say Dominic Cruz is Dominic Cruz and Frankie Edgar is Frankie Edgar, fair enough, but he looked bad in the Rivera fight. He wins against Frankie Saenz, and that was good. That was a good performance, but Frankie Saenz also knocks him over with leg kicks. Rivera was knocking him over with leg kicks. Brad Pickett does throw leg kicks, although they're not like the whipping, really hard kind. And, Brad Pickett's a solid boxer, I guess. Solid enough. So if Faber tries to initiate the offense like he did in the Saenz fight, where he sort of jumps forward and tries to initiate confrontation, then Pickett could pick him off, I suppose, for 3 rounds and just get him to a decision. But so if you want to like one lineup, if you're playing, or even if you're betting, I suppose. Although I think I would want closer to like plus 350, 400. But if you want like a lottery ticket, and to say, well, okay, maybe he can just sort of outpoint him to victory, that might be something. But I can't take Uriah Faber for 9,600. I mean, for what purpose is he the most expensive fighter on this DraftKings card? It just doesn't compute for me based on how he's fought recently. His last stop was in let's see, what was it? 2014. He had 4 in a row up to that point, admittedly, but I mean that's a long time ago now, and he looks like he's retiring at the right time. Let's put it that way. Brad Pickett should also be retiring, so we'll see if he does do that. If we have a double retirement match, but so I think Pickett for a lottery ticket. No, there you go, rhyme. But otherwise, I think just avoid. I don't know, because I don't see this fight finishing either. Brad Pickett's not knocking out Uriah Faber, and unless Faber subs him, which I mean Pickett's a decent wrestler too, so I don't know if that's happening. So yeah, I would just say fade. That's going to be my strategy. So on to the next fight. Oh, the battle of the up and comers. Mickey Gall versus Sage Northcutt, Super Sage Northcutt. It's Gall can be had for 8,200 on DraftKings. Sage at 8,000, and your lines are as follows: Northcutt at plus 137, Gall at minus 162. As far as the betting line goes, I think I would take the plus money on Sage Northcutt and run here. Not that he's definitely going to win, but we just don't know what Mickey Gall is. There's a lot of hype on the Mickey Gall train right now that I don't understand. Yeah, he's a legit brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, fine. But who do we see him beat? We saw him beat Mike Jackson, UFC cameraman, basically, essentially. And then I think he's got like a losing boxing record, and he's 0-2 in MMA, something like that. And then he beat CM Punk. And so I see people saying, well, he hasn't had UFC competition, and I would agree with that, but I would go further than that. I would say he hasn't had regional competition. He hasn't had anything better than regional competition, and he hasn't even had that in his last 2 fights, because CM Punk, I was thinking about this earlier today. I was thinking about, the guy Chris Avila who trains with the Diaz brothers. He came up and absolutely got starched in his 2 fights here. And he wasn't fighting world beaters either. And he wasn't lighting the world on fire in the regionals, but he had a winning record. So do you think Chris Avila beat CM Punk? Because I sure do. I think it's not even that close. He's got a jiu-jitsu game. He's got a decent boxing game, training with the Diaz brothers. So I don't think it's even close. And the same goes for Mike Jackson. Like, these guys are not MMA fighters. His last two fights were against guys who are not regional level fighters. And the one before that, he was a regional fight where he got the sub, but it was just sort of like he pressured the guy, and the guy didn't really know what to do, it seemed like, and he just got a quick sub, got a quick rear naked choke. So look, maybe I'm really underselling him, but I don't think so. I think, I'm not saying he's terrible. I'm saying that he looked capable on the ground in that CM Punk fight. But we just don't know. There's just no way to know. And Sage Northcutt, he hasn't exploded like the UFC hoped he would, but he's a martial artist all his life. He's got good, clean striking. Maybe his grappling is not great, and maybe that's Mickey Gall advantage. But again, we haven't seen him try to do it against anybody who's any good. So I need to wait and see what Mickey Gall is against a real fighter before I would ever pick him in the spot. Like, I might not even have him on any DraftKings cards. And then if he burns me, so be it. Because I just feel like there's other guys to have in that price range. And if I can get Sage for less, I'm going to have a decent amount of Sage for less. But that's just my take on it. I saw a retweet today saying that, a lot of money was coming in on Gall, so take that for what it's worth. I mean, people tend to read too much into that. It doesn't mean nothing, but it doesn't mean, necessarily change your bet either. So, I don't know. We'll see. Let me know what you think about that one, too, because that's an interesting one. But, alright, so our main event of the evening is Paige Van Zandt versus Michelle Waterson. Van Zandt, 8,300 on DraftKings. Waterson, 7,900. And our prices for betting are minus 107 for Waterson, minus 113 for Van Zandt, so another pick'em, essentially. Watched a lot of Van Zandt for this fight, and a couple of Waterson fights, and when have we ever seen, really, Paige Van Zandt have real success with distance striking? I mean, I don't really think we've ever seen it. If you guys can point me to something where she's really looked good, just standing in the pocket and throwing, I'd love to see it. But to me, her success is in the clinch. When she can get in the clinch, she can throw her elbows, she can take it to the ground, and she can beat up on her opponent. I feel like she was even getting tagged a bit in that Beck Rawlings fight before hitting that switch kick, which for all rights probably shouldn't have landed. Beck should have kind of probably gotten out of the way of that, but that's neither here nor there. And I'm nothing close to a fighter, so I wouldn't really know anyway, but just my stupid little armchair opinion. But yeah, I don't. Waterson is comfortable, looks comfortable on the ground. Karate, obviously, so she's got quick legs, quick kicks, quick striking. She's comfortable throwing at distance, and she's comfortable on the ground, as I said. And we saw in that Rose Namajunas fight that Paige is a good offensive wrestler, probably not as good of a defensive wrestler. Now, you could say that's Rose Namajunas, and that's different. Fine, but we can only go by what we see, and I saw her really struggle when she got put on her back. So if Waterson can do that again, maybe she can have some success. So I'm going Waterson here. I'm going to have quite a bit of Waterson. I might have some Paige too. I haven't decided. But I'll post my lineups on my Twitter, and I'll put my Twitter in the description too if you want to follow along and heckle me about how bad my picks suck, because that's happened a time or two. But yeah, so otherwise I think that's it. Let me know what you think about my analysis, love, hate, or otherwise, in the comments below. Difference of opinion, always glad to hear it. Let's talk about the fights before we lock in our DraftKings or bet or whatever. But otherwise, Enjoy the fights, and I will see you later. Peace.